You know, one of the things that most people actually miss when they do their landings, and here's an example here. I'm landing at Nice, in Nice Côte d'Azur in France with the Boeing 737 for Ryanair, and it's a pretty straightforward approach and not really an issue. But the thing is, uh, during the flare, this is gonna be a little later, and during the flare, what most people forget about airliners is that even though they're different from general aviation, they also have some similarities. But how do I get from this? Because one instructor, or maybe even just flight simulator, or even just a random YouTube tutorial, what they say to you when you fly a GA aircraft is that when you flare, when you flare, you basically can't let the aircraft land. You cut the throttle, yes, and you can't let the aircraft land. You just pull the nose as much as possible, obviously preventing a stall, and you pull the nose as much as possible until until the aircraft finally touches down, but it's something that you're technically trying to avoid. Like, you cannot just let the aircraft land, because if not, it's going to be a hard landing. And the point I'm trying to make with that because is that this is also very similar with airliners, except that you do it much later. Because you actually cut the throttle when you're around 30 to 10 feet above the ground, or if you're in an Airbus, when the aircraft calls out 50, 40, 30, the GBWS, that's how they're called. Uh, when during one of those calls, it says retard. I mean, it's how it literally says, not an offense somehow, but but yeah, it says retard, and that means that you have to cut the throttle. And it normally happens after 20 feet, maybe 15, somewhere around that. And and yeah, that is actually quite useful because when you actually cut the throttle in Boeing, it has to be around 30 to 10 feet. You just cut the throttle, and basically you up from there you do the same technique that the instructor told you in the general aviation. It could be a Cessna or any prop aircraft, propeller. In a jetliner, the method is really just the same. You just don't let it land. Please. You don't let it land, and and from that you'll make probably the smoothest landings you've ever made. And that is why just don't be afraid to do that, because what most people do is that they're afraid of ballooning the aircraft, and yeah, that is also an issue, granted, but yeah, people just do the opposite. They don't flare because they're afraid of ballooning the aircraft. And yeah, that is actually a quite common mistake everyone does. But there has to be some sort of do not let the aircraft land technique. And and yeah, that is why I highly encourage you to do so. But the thing is that there are circumstances. There are, such as if the runway is too short, you can't just lose all of that runway. It isn't that much, because if you just start to flare at around 30 feet and then you end up, yeah, and then it goes pretty fast. It isn't that you lose half the runway. It goes pretty fast. But if you're in a shorter runway, maybe in Skiathos or something, you have to land a little bit early, at the touchdown zone, not later, because if you later, you're risking a runway excursion, and that is where issues start. And and that is why you can't just balloon the aircraft, because yeah, as I said before, it is an issue. If you don't want to balloon an aircraft whenever you're going to at a short runway, and that is why you're somehow forced to do a hard-ish landing. And yeah, that is where it comes. A hard landing isn't necessarily the most dangerous one or something. A hard landing, it has to be necessary sometimes. And the tires can withstand the impact reasonably. It just does just don't make it too hard. If you make it too hard, like 1500 feet per minute, that is a lot. You actually nosedive and maybe even crash. But if you're around 500, maybe 800 feet per minute ish, and that's maximum. 900 feet per minute maximum. That is a fairly nice spot to actually the land the aircraft hard but safe. That is the words you have to be using when you make a hard landing. Hard but safe. And yeah, that's one of the circumstances. The other one is that if you're in at a quite long aircraft, for example, I mean, I'm not talking about not necessarily long because that's relative. Because long, I mean that it could be long for example, the A321. The A321 is it's actually considered as a long aircraft, and even in the cockpit it says warning tail strike, and that is something a lot of Airbus pilots need to consider because they normally come from flying the A320 or the A319, and those aircraft have the fuselage quite short relative to the A321, and that is why when you're actually doing the flare or when you're taking off, you have to be a little more cautious. So that is why when you're doing the flare, you basically say don't let the aircraft land, but the angle of attack will actually increase, and also your attitude will also increase. So and that is where you risk a tail strike, which brings me to the circumstance number three, which you should avoid, is if you're encountering a near stall or at least some sort of if for whatever reason you lost so much speed because yeah, if you let the aircraft just sit there floating above the runway, you're losing speed because there's no throttle. And if you're at a lower than VREF, if you're lower than the VREF, which is the speed at which you need to be landing at knots, you risk a stall. And stalling, even if it's just above the runway, is not safe. And especially since it's more likely to make a hard landing when you're when you're stalling than when you're at a fair speed. So yeah, with that is the ironic thing. And and yeah, as you can see here, I just want you to watch the end of this clip, and because yeah, it'll be a smooth landing, spoiler alert. but but yeah, it's something I made, and it puts the same points to what I mentioned. So yeah, I please enjoy the smooth landing. Just as a warning, this video hasn't ended because I'm gonna make another point. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, the landing was actually quite good, and the G's add-on, which basically tracks you um the force of the landing and other circumstances, just such as the G forces and some other cool stuff that actually somehow measures, and it's quite useful to improve your landings. I highly recommend it. It's in flightsim.to. But yeah, I used it. It doesn't appear in the recording, but it's there. It's at minus 124 feet per minute, somewhere around that, which is not bad for a Boeing 737. And and yeah, that is a good example on how to make the technique I just explained. And so, yeah, um, I just wanted to say that those are tricks that actually do work for me. And when I started implementing them, they actually worked my landing is tremendously improved. So that is why if you start following these tips and tricks on how to improve your landings, they will help you, and that is where I highly encourage you to subscribe to this channel. And this hasn't been this I mean this is really a big video, but I really do wish that you do subscribe because it will help you. And in the future, I will be doing more tips and tricks on how to do landings and mistakes and stuff like that, which I already done. There are some videos about that, and yeah, they're actually quite useful to improve your landings on the flight simulator, especially, or even in real life. But yeah, this should be really useful, and I also encourage you to like this video because that way it spreads to more people who desperately need to improve their landings. And yeah, I would really appreciate that. And without any further ado, thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next flight. Happy flying.